Across the galaxy, humanity was known for exactly one thing: being laughably primitive. While other species wielded plasma cannons that could melt through starship hulls and energy weapons that bent reality itself, humans clung to their ancient projectile weapons like children clutching security blankets. The Galactic Council's military briefings often featured human slug throwers as comic relief, crude metal tubes that hurled tiny pieces of lead through the air using controlled explosions. Even the newest human recruits to the Galactic Defense Force were assigned to support roles deemed too backward to handle real weapons. Their marksmanship scores were dismissed as irrelevant since their weapons were considered obsolete museum pieces. The running joke among alien species was simple: give a human a real weapon, and they'll probably try to hit it with a rock. But jokes have a way of dying when the laughter stops. And the laughter was about to stop very, very suddenly. When the Zarathi Dominion's impenetrable war machines rolled across 3 star systems in a single day, when their adaptive armor proved immune to every energy weapon in the galaxy's arsenal, when the greatest military minds of a dozen species stood helpless before an enemy that seemed unstoppable, that's when someone remembered the humans and their ridiculous little metal projectiles. What happened next would rewrite every military manual in the galaxy and turn humanity's greatest weakness into their most terrifying strength. Because sometimes, in a universe full of impossible technology and advanced warfare, the old ways aren't primitive. They're pure. The emergency klaxon echoed through the command deck of the Galactic Defense Force flagship Harmony's Edge with a sound that chilled even veteran officers to their bone. Admiral Kethvar, a towering Altarian whose blue-scaled hide had weathered 40 years of deep space combat, stared at the tactical display with an expression of growing disbelief. The holographic projection showed something that should have been impossible: 3 entire star systems going dark in the span of 18 standard hours. "Confirm those readings," Kethvar commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never lost a major engagement. Behind him, dozens of officers from a dozen different species worked frantically at their stations, their various appendages flying across control surfaces as they tried to make sense of the incoming data. Lieutenant Zura-Th, a crystalline Vexian whose transparent body pulsed with nervous energy, looked up from her console with what passed for fear among her people. "Admiral, the readings are confirmed. The Kepler Defense Grid, the Arcturus Station, and the entire Proxima Colonial Network have all ceased communications simultaneously. Our long-range sensors detect massive energy signatures consistent with orbital bombardment across all 3 systems." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of life support systems and the occasional beep of monitoring equipment. Kethvar had seen many terrible things during his career, but the systematic destruction of 3 heavily defended star systems in less than a day was beyond anything in his experience or his nightmares. "Sir," called out Commander Thexra from the communications station, her insectoid features clicking with distress. "We're receiving a transmission from the outer sensor network. It's from Captain Reynolds of the human survey ship Prairie Wind." "Humans?" Kethvar suppressed a sigh. The newest members of the Galactic Defense Force, admitted more out of political necessity than military value. Their primitive technology and backward weapons made them suitable only for survey work and supply runs, tasks that kept them safely away from any real combat. The fact that a human ship was apparently the only source of information about this catastrophe was both ironic and concerning. "Put him through," the Admiral ordered. The main display flickered, then resolved into the image of a middle-aged human male with graying hair and tired eyes. Captain Thomas Reynolds had been running survey missions for 3 years, and his reports were always thorough, if unremarkable. Today, however, his usual calm demeanor was replaced by barely controlled urgency. "Admiral Kethvar, thank the stars you're receiving this. I'm transmitting from the edge of the Kepler system, and, sir, what I witnessed here, it defies everything we know about modern warfare." Kethvar leaned forward in his command chair. "Explain, Captain. What exactly did you observe?" Reynolds' image flickered slightly as his ship's transmitter struggled with the distance. "We were conducting a routine mineral survey of the outer asteroid belt when the attack began. The attacking force." "Admiral, I've never seen anything like it. Massive ships, each one at least 3 kilometers long, with hull plating that our sensors couldn't even properly identify. They emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation and began systematic bombardment of every defensive position in the system. How many ships? Commander Thexra interjected. At least 200, possibly more. But that's not the worst part. Reynolds paused, running a hand through his hair. Admiral, our defensive fleet engaged them with everything they had. Plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, particle beam arrays, gravitic mines, the full arsenal. I watched Altarian heavy cruisers unload their entire complement of weapons at point-blank range. Kethvar felt his blood chill. Altarian heavy cruisers carried enough firepower to glass a small planet. If they had failed to stop this invasion force, what was the result, Captain? Nothing, sir. Absolutely nothing. The enemy ship's hull plating absorbed every single energy discharge without so much as a scorch mark. Our most powerful weapons might as well have been flashlights for all the effect they had. The defensive fleet was systematically destroyed in less than 2 hours. The bridge crew exchanged worried glances. Energy weapons were the foundation of all modern military technology. If an enemy had developed some form of energy-resistant armor that could completely neutralize their offensive capabilities, then the entire galactic defense strategy would need to be reconsidered. Captain, Kethvar said slowly, did you observe any vulnerabilities in their defenses? Any weaknesses at all? Reynolds was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. There was one thing, Admiral. During the battle, I observed a piece of debris from one of our destroyed ships, a chunk of hull plating, strike one of the enemy vessels at high velocity. The impact actually left a visible dent in their armor. Physical projectiles seem to have some effect where energy weapons do not. Lieutenant Zarath's crystalline form brightened with confusion. Physical projectiles? You mean kinetic weapons? But those are completely obsolete. No one has used kinetic artillery in centuries. Actually, Reynolds said with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes, that's not entirely accurate. Humans still use kinetic weapons extensively. In fact, they're pretty much the only thing we use. The bridge fell silent again as the implications of that statement sank in. Kethvar had read the reports on human military technology, of course. Their stubborn insistence on using what they called firearms instead of proper energy weapons had been a source of amusement throughout the Galactic Defense Force. The idea that such primitive technology might actually prove relevant in modern warfare seemed absurd. Captain Reynolds, Kethvar said carefully, are you suggesting that human weapons might be effective against these invaders? I'm not sure, Admiral. But if their armor is specifically designed to counter energy-based attacks, then kinetic weapons might be our only option. The problem is, human weapons aren't exactly built for ship-to-ship combat. Our largest firearms are designed for planetary surface engagement. Commander Thexra's antennae twitched with what Kethvar recognized as deep thought. Admiral, what if we could scale up human weapons technology? Their basic principles applied to ship-mounted systems. Before Kethvar could respond, the emergency klaxon sounded again, this time accompanied by a priority alert beacon. Lieutenant Zarath's form flashed bright red as she processed incoming data. Admiral, we have multiple hyperspace signatures emerging at the edge of this system. Configuration matches the vessels Captain Reynolds described. Estimated arrival time, 6 hours. Kethvar stood from his command chair, his tactical mind already racing through possibilities. 6 hours to prepare for an enemy that had proven immune to every conventional weapon in their arsenal. 6 hours to determine if the laughably primitive kinetic weapons of humanity might hold the key to survival. Commander Thexra, signal all human vessels in the fleet to report to the Harmony's edge immediately. I want to speak with their weapons specialists. He turned to the communications station. Lieutenant, send a priority message to Earth Command. Tell them we need detailed technical specifications for their largest kinetic weapons systems. And we need them now. Sir, Zarath called from her station. What should I tell the fleet about our defensive preparations? Admiral Kethvar looked at the tactical display showing the approaching enemy signatures, then at the image of Captain Reynolds still displayed on the main screen. For the first time in his 40-year career, he was about to bet everything on technology that the entire galaxy considered obsolete. Tell them to prepare for the most unconventional battle in galactic history, he said grimly. And pray to whatever deities they favor that human primitiveness is actually human ingenuity in disguise. As the bridge crew hurried to carry out his orders, Kethvar couldn't help but reflect on the irony of the situation. After centuries of advanced technological development, after achieving mastery over energy and matter that would have seemed like magic to ancient civilizations, they were potentially going to be saved by weapons that threw rocks really, really fast. The enemy was coming, armed with technology that made them seem invincible. But they had made one crucial mistake in their tactical planning. They had only prepared for a civilized war against civilized weapons. They weren't prepared for humans. Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez had seen many strange things during her 15 years with the Terran Defense Corps, but being summoned to a Galactic Defense Force flagship to discuss weapons with aliens who usually treated humans like particularly slow children was definitely a new experience. She stood in the shuttle bay of the Harmony's Edge, adjusting her dress uniform while trying not to stare too obviously at the variety of alien species bustling around her. The escort that met her was a tall, blue-scaled Altarian who introduced himself as Commander Thexare and led her through corridors that seemed designed for beings considerably larger than humans. The artificial gravity was slightly heavier than Earth standard, making each step feel deliberate and weighty. Sergeant Major, Commander Thexare said as they walked, his translator rendering his voice with a slight mechanical undertone. I must admit that this is an unusual situation for all of us. Admiral Kethvar has requested a consultation about human kinetic weapons in the context of ship-to-ship combat. I confess that most of us are unfamiliar with the practical applications of such traditional technology. Elena smiled politely. She had heard this tone before, the careful diplomacy that aliens used when they wanted to say primitive, but were too polite to be direct about it. I understand, Commander. Most species moved beyond kinetic weapons centuries ago. We humans are a bit stubborn about tradition. They entered a lift that carried them quickly to the command deck. As the doors opened, Elena was struck by the controlled chaos of the bridge. Officers from multiple species worked at stations she didn't recognize, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and modulated tones. At the center of it all stood Admiral Kethvar, an imposing figure whose presence commanded immediate respect. The Admiral turned as they approached, his reptilian features showing a mixture of urgency and curiosity. Sergeant Major Vasquez, thank you for responding so quickly. I apologize for the unusual circumstances, but we find ourselves in need of your expertise regarding human weapons technology. Elena saluted crisply. At your service, Admiral. Though I have to say, this is the first time anyone's asked my opinion on military strategy at this level. These are unprecedented circumstances, Kethvar replied, gesturing toward the main tactical display. We face an enemy whose defensive capabilities appear to completely neutralize energy-based weapons. According to witness reports, physical projectiles may be our only effective option. Elena studied the display, noting the positions of enemy vessels and the projected battle zones. Her mind automatically began calculating ranges, trajectories, and ammunition requirements, skills honed through years of training that had always seemed quaint in an age of energy weapons. Admiral, with respect, human kinetic weapons weren't designed for void combat. Our largest systems are planetary defense railguns and atmospheric artillery. The physics of space-to-space engagement are completely different. A crystalline officer that Elena assumed was Vexian spoke up from a nearby station. Sergeant Major, could you explain the fundamental principles of human kinetic weapons? Many of us are unfamiliar with the underlying technology. Elena nodded, moving to a clear section of the bridge where everyone could see her. The basic concept is simple. Accelerate a projectile to high velocity, and use kinetic energy transfer to damage the target. We've been refining this concept for thousands of years, from throwing spears to electromagnetic railguns. She gestured to the tactical display. Our weapons work on the principle that kinetic energy equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. Increase either the mass or velocity of your projectile, and you dramatically increase the energy transferred on impact. Unlike energy weapons, which can be deflected or absorbed, Kinetic weapons rely on simple physics. They have to go somewhere when they hit something solid. Admiral Kethvar's expression grew thoughtful. The enemy armor appears to be some form of energy absorption system. If it's specifically designed to counter plasma and particle weapons, then it might not be prepared for old-fashioned physics, Elena finished. The question is whether we can adapt human weapons principles to ship-based systems quickly enough to matter. Commander Thexra brought up a holographic display of human weapons specifications. We've received technical data from Earth Command. Your largest kinetic weapons appear to be something called Project Thor, orbital bombardment systems using tungsten rods. Elena's eyebrows rose. The rods from God. Those are theoretical weapons, mostly used for planetary bombardment. The concept is simple. Drop a tungsten rod from orbit and let gravity do the rest. No explosive needed. The kinetic energy is enough to level a city block. Could the principle be adapted for ship-to-ship combat? Asked the Vexian officer. Theoretically, yes. Instead of gravity acceleration, you'd use electromagnetic rails or compressed gas systems to achieve velocity. The challenge is building something large enough to be effective at the scales we're talking about. Elena paused, studying the enemy ship's specifications. These vessels are 3 kilometers long. To penetrate their hull, you'd need projectiles with enormous mass and velocity. Admiral Kethvar activated his personal communicator. Engineering, this is the Admiral. I need you to run theoretical calculations on adapting large-scale kinetic weapon systems to our heavy cruisers. Work with the human technical specifications being transmitted now. Elena watched as the bridge crew began implementing her suggestions, their advanced computers running calculations that would have taken human engineers days to complete. The speed and efficiency of their work was impressive, even if their underlying approach to warfare had proven inadequate against this new threat. Sergeant Major, Commander Thexra said, there's another consideration. Human infantry weapons, what you call small arms. Could these be effective against enemy personnel if boarding actions become necessary? Elena's expression grew serious. Commander, human small arms are designed to stop other humans. I can't say how effective they'd be against alien physiology. But I will say this. Our weapons have one advantage that energy weapons don't, which is reliability. A human rifle will fire in vacuum, underwater, in extreme heat or cold, after being buried in mud or sand, even if it's been damaged by explosives. Energy weapons are sophisticated, but sophisticated means vulnerable to disruption. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most dependable. The tactical display suddenly flashed red as new sensor data arrived. Lieutenant Zaratich's crystalline form pulsed with alarm. Admiral, the enemy fleet has increased velocity. New estimated arrival time, for hours. Kethvar turned back to Elena. Sergeant Major, I'm going to ask something that may seem unusual. Would you be willing to coordinate human weapons integration across our entire fleet? Your understanding of kinetic principles could be crucial to our survival. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. For hours to implement weapons technology that most of the galaxy considered obsolete against an enemy that had proven unstoppable. The logical part of her mind said it was impossible. But Elena Vasquez hadn't become a sergeant major by accepting impossible odds. Admiral, I'll need direct communication with our engineering teams and access to your fabrication systems. If we're going to make kinetic weapons work in void combat, we'll need to modify everything from projectile composition to targeting systems. Done. What else do you need? Elena smiled grimly. Coffee, sir. Lots of coffee. And every human engineer in the fleet. If we're going to teach the galaxy how to fight dirty, we're going to need all hands on deck. As the bridge crew rushed to implement her requirements, Elena found herself thinking about the irony of the situation. The same weapons that had made humans seem primitive and backwards might be about to save the most advanced civilization in galactic history. Her grandfather had served in the old Earth military, back when humans fought their wars with chemical propellants and metal bullets. He used to tell her stories about battles won not by superior technology, but by superior determination and the willingness to use whatever worked, regardless of how crude it seemed. Looking at the approaching enemy fleet on the tactical display, Elena whispered a quiet thanks to her grandfather's memory. Today, his old-fashioned wisdom might prove to be the most advanced military strategy in the galaxy. The countdown continued, 3 hours and 57 minutes until contact with an enemy that had never faced an opponent stubborn enough to fight with rocks and metal in the age of energy and light. They were about to learn that humans didn't abandon their old ways because they found better ones. They kept their old ways and made them better. The engineering deck of the Harmony's Edge had been transformed into something that resembled organized chaos. Chief Engineer Mortax, a 6-armed hegemony specialist whose species had invented hyperdrive technology, found himself taking orders from a human woman who understood principles that his people had forgotten millennia ago. The irony wasn't lost on him, but survival had a way of making philosophical considerations irrelevant. The rail system needs to be at least 200 meters long to achieve the velocities we need, Elena explained to the assembled engineering team, her voice carrying clearly through the translator systems. The projectile acceleration has to be gradual and consistent, or the tungsten rod will deform under the stress. She stood before a holographic display showing the internal structure of an Altarian heavy cruiser, pointing to modifications that would have been considered impossible just hours before. Around her, engineers from 7 different species worked frantically to implement designs that combined advanced alien manufacturing with principles older than recorded galactic history. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, the lead human engineer, looked up from her calculations. Elena, the power requirements for a 200-meter rail system are enormous. We're talking about redirecting power from main engines and defensive systems. That's correct, Elena replied. But remember, we only need to fire these weapons once or twice per engagement. Kinetic weapons don't require sustained energy output like plasma cannons. We front-load the power requirement and deliver maximum impact. Mortax's multiple arms moved simultaneously across his control interfaces, his species' natural ability for multitasking allowing him to coordinate fabrication across multiple systems at once. Sergeant Major, the fabrication units can produce the tungsten rods you've specified, but the electromagnetic accelerators will require significant modifications to our existing systems. Elena nodded. Chief, I understand the challenges. But consider this. Your existing energy weapon systems are designed for sustained fire against shields and conventional armor. We're building something designed for single-shot penetration against whatever energy absorption technology the enemy is using. She manipulated the holographic display, showing the projected impact of a tungsten rod accelerated to significant fraction of light speed. The kinetic energy transfer from a 2-ton tungsten rod at these velocities will be equivalent to a small nuclear weapon, but concentrated into a projectile only 20 centimeters in diameter. There's no known armor that can completely absorb that kind of kinetic impact. Captain Torres, commander of the human contingent, reviewed the tactical implications on his personal display. Elena, what about rate of fire? Energy weapons can cycle rapidly, but kinetic systems will have much slower firing rates, Elena admitted. That's why targeting becomes crucial. We can't afford to miss, and we can't afford to waste shots on ineffective angles. Every projectile has to count. The fabrication bays hummed with unprecedented activity as alien technology adapted human concepts. The sight of Vexian crystalline engineers working alongside human metallurgists to perfect tungsten alloy composition would have been unthinkable just days before. Now, it represented the galaxy's best hope for survival. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a human physicist who had been studying at the Galactic Science Institute, emerged from a consultation with the ship's computer systems. Elena, I've been running simulations on projectile behavior in void combat. The good news is that kinetic weapons will be incredibly effective if they hit. The bad news is that targeting at these ranges with these velocities is going to be extremely challenging. Elena considered this, her tactical experience weighing against the realities of space combat. Doctor, how do current energy weapons handle targeting at extreme ranges? They use predictive algorithms based on enemy movement patterns and automated tracking systems. But energy weapons travel at light speed. Targeting calculations are relatively straightforward. Kinetic projectiles will have significant flight time, during which enemy vessels can maneuver. Then, we need to think like hunters instead of soldiers, Elena said, a slight smile playing across her features. My grandfather taught me to shoot when I was 10 years old. The first thing he told me was that you don't shoot where the target is, you shoot where it's going to be. Lieutenant Commander Chen looked up from her engineering calculations. Elena, are you suggesting we use prediction algorithms based on hunting techniques? I'm suggesting we use every advantage we can get. Human hunters have been calculating trajectory, wind speed, target movement, and projectile drop for thousands of years. We've refined these skills to an art form. Why not apply that knowledge to space combat? Chief Mortax's translator rendered what Elena assumed was surprise. You want to incorporate biological reflexes and intuitive calculations into our targeting systems. I want to incorporate human instincts into your targeting systems. There's a difference between knowing how to calculate a trajectory and feeling it in your bones. Humans have been throwing things at moving targets since before we developed written language. Captain Torres activated his communicator. All human gunners and weapons specialists report to Engineering Deck C7 immediately. We're about to give the galaxy a crash course in marksmanship. As the human military personnel assembled, Elena began explaining concepts that had never been formally integrated into galactic military doctrine. The idea of Kentucky windage, adjusting aim based on intuitive understanding of projectile behavior, fascinated alien engineers whose species had never needed to develop such skills. The key to kinetic weapons, Elena explained to the mixed group of humans and aliens, is understanding that your projectile is subject to all the forces acting on it from the moment it leaves your weapon until it hits the target. In space, that means gravitational influences from nearby stellar bodies, the relative motion of your own ship, and the predicted movement of your target. She gestured to the tactical display showing the approaching enemy fleet. These ships are massive, 3 kilometers long. That makes them relatively slow to maneuver, but it also means they have significant momentum. A ship that size can't stop quickly or change direction rapidly. We can use that against them. Dr. Tanaka nodded enthusiastically. Elena, if we combine human predictive shooting techniques with our computational power, we might be able to achieve targeting accuracy that exceeds anything possible with energy weapons at extreme ranges. The fabrication systems chimed as the first completed kinetic weapon system came online. Chief Mortax examined the readings with what Elena recognized as professional admiration. Sergeant Major, your specifications have produced a weapon unlike anything in our military databases. The power requirements are enormous, the firing rate is minimal, but the potential impact will either save us all or prove that sometimes old ideas stay old for good reasons, Elena finished. Chief, how long until we can have these systems installed on our primary vessels? 2 hours for basic installation, another hour for targeting calibration and integration with ship systems. Elena checked the countdown display. The enemy fleet would arrive in just over 2 hours. If they could get the kinetic weapons online and properly calibrated in time, they would have exactly one chance to prove that human primitiveness was actually human adaptability. All right, people, she announced to the assembled engineering teams. We're about to find out if the oldest military technology in human history can save the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. Let's make sure we don't waste this opportunity. As the teams dispersed to their final preparations, Elena found herself thinking about the historical irony of the situation. Humanity had joined the Galactic Defense Force as junior partners, contributing survey ships and support personnel while leaving real military operations to species with proper weapons technology. Now, those same primitive weapons might be about to prove that sometimes, in a universe full of sophisticated solutions, the most effective answer was the simplest one. Throw a really big rock really, really hard. The enemy was coming with technology that made them seem invincible against conventional weapons. But they had never faced an unconventional opponent who still remembered how to fight with sticks and stones, and had spent centuries making those sticks and stones as deadly as physics would allow. In less than 2 hours, the galaxy would discover whether human stubbornness was a weakness or their greatest strength. The bridge of the Harmony's edge had never been quieter. Admiral Kethvar stood before the main tactical display, watching as 200 enemy vessels approached in perfect formation. Around him, Officers from across the galaxy prepared for a battle unlike any in recorded history. The tension was thick enough to cut with a blade. Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez stood at a hastily installed targeting station, her hands moving across controls that merged human instincts with alien technology. The kinetic weapon systems had been installed with minutes to spare, and the entire fleet's survival now depended on whether centuries-old human marksmanship principles could translate to void combat. "Enemy fleet entering extreme weapons range," announced Lieutenant Zara Th, her crystalline form pulsing with nervous energy. "Distance, 50,000 kilometers, and closing." Elena studied the approaching vessels through the targeting system's display. Even at this distance, their size was impressive. Each ship was larger than anything in the Galactic Defense Force fleet. More importantly, their formation was precisely what she had hoped to see: tight, disciplined, and predictable. "Admiral," Elena said quietly, "request permission to coordinate targeting for the opening engagement." Kethvar turned to her with an expression that mixed hope and uncertainty. In 40 years of military service, he had never placed the fate of an entire fleet in the hands of a single non-commissioned officer from a species most considered technologically backward. But desperate times had a way of making the impossible seem reasonable. "Permission granted, Sergeant Major. The fleet is yours." Elena activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All vessels with kinetic weapons, this is targeting control. We're going to do this exactly once, so listen carefully." She manipulated the tactical display, highlighting specific enemy ships. Primary targets are the lead vessels in their formation. These ships are maintaining predictable courses and speeds, which gives us the best chance for successful hits. Remember, these projectiles will have significant flight time. You're not shooting at where they are, you're shooting at where they'll be. Captain Torres, commanding the human heavy cruiser Defiance, checked his weapon status. "Elena, our targeting computers are having difficulty calculating intercept courses at these ranges." "Then, don't use the computers for everything," Elena replied. "Look at the formation spacing, the relative velocities, the gravitational influences from the nearby star. Use the computers for the math, but trust your instincts for the shot." Commander Thexra monitored the enemy approach from his station. "Sergeant Major, the enemy fleet is beginning to spread into attack formation. If we're going to engage at maximum range, it needs to be now." Elena studied the tactical display one final time. The enemy ships were massive, powerful, and had proven invulnerable to every conventional weapon the galaxy possessed. But they were also following standard tactical doctrine, maintaining formation integrity while closing to optimal firing range for their energy weapons. They had no reason to expect kinetic weapons, no experience with opponents who used physical projectiles, and no tactical doctrine for dealing with weapons that followed ballistic trajectories instead of traveling at light speed. "All vessels, prepare to fire on my mark," Elena announced. "Target lead enemy vessels. Calculate for maximum kinetic impact. Remember, we're not trying to destroy them with the first shot. We're trying to prove that they can be damaged." The fleet's energy signatures spiked as massive electromagnetic systems charged for the first salvo. In the engineering sections of a dozen ships, tungsten rods weighing 2 tons each were loaded into rail systems that would accelerate them to velocities approaching significant fractions of light speed. "Targeting solution confirmed," reported Dr. Tanaka from her position at the ballistics calculation station. "Projectile flight time, 47 seconds at current ranges." Elena took a deep breath, thinking about her grandfather's lessons on patience, timing, and the precise moment when everything aligned for the perfect shot. In hunting, you had one chance to bring down your prey. Miss, and you might not get another opportunity. Today, the prey was 3-kilometer-long starships with armor that had proven immune to energy weapons. The stakes were survival of galactic civilization. But the principles remained the same: patience, precision, and timing. "Fire," Elena commanded. Across the human fleet, electromagnetic systems discharged with energies that temporarily dimmed life support systems. Tungsten rods accelerated through 200-meter rail systems, emerging into the void at velocities that turned them into relativistic projectiles. The ships shuddered under the recoil forces as kinetic energy that had been stored in capacitors was transferred to projectiles in milliseconds. For 47 seconds, the bridge of the Harmony's edge was silent except for the steady countdown of the tactical computer. Elena watched the enemy formation continue its approach, completely unaware that death was racing toward them at a significant percentage of light speed. 30 seconds to impact, Dr. Tanaka reported. Admiral Kethvar found himself holding his breath. If the kinetic weapons failed, if the enemy armor proved as resistant to physical projectiles as it was to energy weapons, then the war was effectively over. The Galactic Defense Force possessed no other viable options. 10 seconds to impact, Dr. Tanaka announced. 5, 4, 3, 2 impact. The tactical display exploded with sensor data as 6 tungsten rods struck 3 enemy vessels simultaneously. Elena felt her heart skip as the sensors processed what had happened in the first kinetic weapons engagement in galactic military history. Direct hits on 3 enemy vessels, Lieutenant Zarth reported, her voice filled with amazement. Sensors indicate, Admiral, we're showing massive hull breaches on all 3 targets. The main display zoomed in on the lead enemy ship, where smooth, impenetrable armor had deflected energy weapons for 2 days. A tungsten projectile had punched completely through the vessel from bow to stern. Atmosphere and debris streamed from entry and exit wounds that looked like someone had driven a spear through the ship's hull. Elena stared at the display in stunned silence. She had hoped the kinetic weapons would prove effective, but she hadn't expected such dramatic results. The enemy ship was still moving, but it was clearly damaged in ways that energy weapons had failed to achieve. Sergeant Major, Admiral Kethvar said quietly, I believe the galaxy owes humanity an apology. Before Elena could respond, the enemy fleet's formation began to change. Instead of continuing their steady approach, the massive ships started taking evasive action. Their movements were slow and ponderous due to their size, but the intent was clear. They had been damaged by something they didn't understand, and they were adapting their tactics accordingly. Admiral, Elena said, studying the enemy response, I think we just got their attention. They're trying to avoid predictable trajectories now. Can we compensate for evasive maneuvering? Elena smiled grimly. Admiral, hunters have been shooting at moving targets for as long as humans have existed. Evasive maneuvering just makes it more interesting. She activated the fleet communications system again. All vessels, the enemy is now aware we can hurt them. They're going to start moving unpredictably, which means we need to start thinking like predators instead of soldiers. Watch for patterns in their evasion. Look for moments when they have to commit to a course correction. And remember, they're big, which means they can't change direction quickly. Commander Thexra reported from his tactical station. Sergeant Major, the enemy fleet is returning fire. Energy weapons incoming. Elena watched as brilliant streams of plasma and particle beams reached out toward the human fleet. The alien ships had powerful weapons and sophisticated targeting systems, but they were designed for fighting opponents who used energy weapons and conventional tactics. They weren't prepared for an enemy who shot back with physics instead of energy, who used prediction instead of automation, and who had learned their marksmanship skills by hunting prey that didn't want to be caught. Evasive action authorized, Admiral Kethvar commanded. All vessels, avoid direct engagement with enemy energy weapons. Use mobility and unpredictable maneuvering. As the Harmony's edge began taking evasive action, Elena felt a familiar sensation from her younger days hunting in the forests of Earth. The moment when predator and prey both realized they were in a fight, when instinct and training combined to determine who would survive the encounter. The difference was that today, humanity was no longer the prey. The enemy had superior numbers, better armor, and more powerful energy weapons. But they had made the fatal mistake of assuming that their advantages made them invulnerable. They were about to discover that sometimes the oldest lessons are the most important ones. No matter how advanced your armor, physics still applies. And humans had been applying physics to warfare longer than most species had been using tools. 3 hours into what galactic historians would later call the Battle of Broken Assumptions, the impossible had become routine. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of the Harmony's edge, watching as human kinetic weapons systematically dismantled an enemy fleet that had seemed invincible just hours before. The irony was not lost on him that the most primitive weapons in the galaxy were proving to be the most effective. Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez moved between targeting stations with the calm efficiency of someone who had found their element. Around her, alien officers implemented firing solutions based on hunting techniques that predated galactic civilization, their advanced computers serving human instincts that had been refined over millennia of survival. Confirmed hit on enemy dreadnought designated Alpha 7, reported Lieutenant Commander Chen from her weapons coordination station. Tungsten rod achieved complete penetration. Target is venting atmosphere and showing massive power fluctuations. Elena nodded, already shifting her attention to the next target. The enemy fleet had adapted more quickly than she had expected, abandoning their rigid formations in favor of erratic evasive patterns. But adaptation worked both ways, and humans had been adapting to challenging prey for as long as their species had existed. Target Alpha 7's escort vessels, Elena commanded. They're maintaining close formation to provide mutual defense. Use the gravitational shadow from the damaged dreadnought to mask your trajectory calculations. She manipulated the tactical display, showing how the massive enemy vessel's gravity well could be used to bend projectile paths in ways that energy weapons couldn't match. It was a technique that would have been meaningless with plasma cannons or particle beams. But kinetic weapons followed physics in ways that could be exploited by someone who understood how objects move through space. Dr. Tanaka looked up from her ballistics calculations with an expression of professional admiration. Elena, you're using their own ship's gravity as targeting aids. That's brilliant. It's basic hunting technique, Elena replied. When you're tracking prey through dense forest, you use the environment to your advantage. Trees can hide your approach, but they can also guide your shot if you understand how projectiles behave around obstacles. Admiral Kethvar monitored the overall tactical situation with growing confidence. The human kinetic weapons had achieved something that months of conventional warfare had failed to accomplish. They were winning. Enemy vessels that had shrugged off the combined firepower of multiple species were being systematically disabled by weapons that threw metal rods through space. Admiral, Commander Thexra reported, we're receiving priority communications from multiple enemy vessels. They appear to be attempting to surrender. The bridge fell silent. In all the military histories of the Galactic Defense Force, no account existed of the Zarathi Dominion ever requesting terms of surrender. They were known for fighting to the complete destruction of their forces rather than accepting defeat. Put them through, Kethvar commanded. The main display resolved into the image of a being unlike anything in the galactic databases, tall, angular, with features that suggested both intelligence and desperate confusion. When it spoke, the translator systems struggled to render concepts that had no equivalent in galactic languages. Vessels of the Defensive Coalition, the being said, its translated voice carrying overtones of bewilderment. We request cessation of hostilities. Your weapons employ principles that violate established conventions of civilized warfare. Elena stepped forward, her expression mixing professional curiosity with grim satisfaction. Admiral, request permission to respond. Kethvar nodded. Go ahead, Sergeant Major. Elena faced the alien commander with the calm confidence of someone who had just proven that everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare was wrong. This is Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez of the Terran Defense Corps. Our weapons don't violate any conventions. They're just older than your conventions. The enemy commander's features showed what the translator rendered as profound confusion. Impossible. Kinetic projectile weapons are primitive, ineffective against modern defensive systems. No advanced species would employ such obsolete technology. You're right, Elena agreed. No advanced species would. Fortunately for us, humans aren't advanced, we're stubborn. We keep our old weapons because they work, not because they're sophisticated. She gestured toward the tactical display showing the damaged enemy fleet. Your armor was designed to counter energy weapons, plasma, particles, directed energy arrays. Very impressive technology. Unfortunately for you, our weapons don't use energy. They use physics. And physics doesn't care how advanced your armor is. Admiral Kethvar stepped forward. Enemy commander, You initiated hostilities against multiple star systems and destroyed civilian populations. Surrender will be unconditional, and you will submit to Galactic War Crimes Tribunals. The enemy commander's translated response carried overtones of resignation. We accept your terms. Our strategic calculations did not account for kinetic weapons of this effectiveness. We were unprepared for combat against a species that retained primitive technologies. As the enemy fleet began powering down weapons and assuming surrender positions, Elena found herself reflecting on the events of the past few hours. The galaxy's most advanced military forces had been helpless against an enemy that seemed invincible, until someone remembered that humans still fought with metal projectiles launched by electromagnetic force. Sergeant Major, Admiral Kethvar said quietly, I believe the Galactic Defense Force owes humanity a significant reassessment. Your species' insistence on maintaining primitive weapons may have saved our civilization. Elena smiled. Admiral, I don't think our weapons are primitive. I think everyone else's weapons are overcomplicated. Sometimes the best solution is the simplest one that works. Lieutenant Zarath looked up from her communications station, her crystalline form pulsing with what Elena had learned to recognize as amazement. Sergeant Major, we're receiving reports from across the galaxy. Word of the battle is spreading, and military commanders are requesting immediate consultations on human weapons technology. I suppose the jokes about human slug throwers are going to stop now, Commander Thexare observed. Elena chuckled. Oh, I doubt that. But maybe the next time someone laughs at human weapons, they'll remember that these primitive slug throwers just saved the galaxy from an enemy that your advanced energy weapons couldn't even scratch. She turned to Admiral Kethvar. Admiral, if the Galactic Defense Force is serious about integrating kinetic weapons into your standard arsenal, you're going to need human advisors. Not just for the technology, but for the tactics. Kinetic weapons require a different approach to warfare, one that humans have been perfecting for thousands of years. Kethvar nodded thoughtfully. Sergeant Major, how would you feel about a promotion? The position of Director of Kinetic Warfare Doctrine is about to become available, and I can't think of anyone more qualified for the role. Elena looked around the bridge at the alien officers who had spent the day learning that human primitiveness was actually sophisticated understanding of fundamental principles. The same beings who had once treated humans as technologically backward junior partners were now looking to them for military leadership. Admiral, she said with a grin, I accept. But I have one condition. We do this the human way. No overcomplicated targeting systems, no automated firing solutions, no computer-controlled everything. If the galaxy wants to learn kinetic warfare, they're going to learn it from the ground up, starting with how to throw rocks accurately. As the enemy fleet completed its surrender procedures and the immediate threat to galactic civilization ended, Elena Vasquez found herself in command of the most revolutionary military doctrine in recorded history. The weapons that had made humanity seem primitive and backwards had proven to be exactly what the galaxy needed when sophistication failed. The laughter about human slug throwers had indeed stopped. In its place came the respectful silence of beings who had learned that sometimes, in a universe full of impossible technology and advanced solutions, the oldest answers are still the best ones. Humans had saved the galaxy not by becoming more advanced, but by remaining exactly as stubborn and practical as they had always been. And in a cosmos where energy weapons ruled supreme, the simple physics of throwing really big rocks really hard had proven to be the ultimate tactical advantage. The age of energy weapons wasn't ending, but it was no longer the only game in the galaxy. Thanks to human persistence and their refusal to abandon primitive technologies, kinetic weapons had earned their place alongside the most sophisticated military systems ever devised. After all, physics was physics, and humans had been applying physics to warfare longer than most species had been reaching for the stars. They laughed at humanity's primitive marksmen. Then, one shot broke through alien plating HFY.